Over the last few days, winter has decided to rear its head one more time. So we got up a bit of a surprise. Snowing, windy snowing thing. Wasn't really a storm. And woke up the next morning to there being ice over the trees and grass and pretty much everything. And it made for a very interesting sight first thing in the morning with the birds singing in this snow-covered, icy version of our home. Hi, welcome back to Just One More Row, our little knitting podcast we got going on here. And I've got a few things that I'd like to talk to you about today. The very first thing is that, ta-da, the Grecian blouse is done. And I'm going to include hopefully some footage of me modeling this. As far as the make of it, I would review this pattern at like an 8 out of 10. I would make it again. There were some pattern corrections that needed to be made. This is a spider web pattern. Helps if I turn it the correct way, doesn't it? This is like a spider web pattern. And in between here, these are each 2 chains. And I'll include the rest of the pattern corrections down below. But there were some extra chains written into the actual garment pattern instructions. And once you took those out, like everything laid flat. Beforehand it was kind of bubbly. The next thing to remember is these are all done in UK crochet terms. So what is a UK treble is a US double. Full disclosure, I made a mistake. The center of each of these, this part right here, that is supposed to be single crochets, and I did half doubles. I don't mind it, but be aware that if yours looks a little bit different than mine, it's because I goofed. And that is a Joe problem, not a pattern problem. I also have expanded this eyelet section right here and adding in 2 extra rows of that US double crochet UK treble. It's supposed to be 1 row double treble eyelet and then another solid row. I did 2 solid rows eyelets and then 2 solid rows. And I did the same thing on the arms. I've also lengthened this by about 5 inches. Now, a little perspective on why I did that. Within vintage patterns especially, you will find that they are physically much shorter. Today we wear our shirts or, top covering garments typically much longer than they used to be worn. We have a tendency, if it's not like specifically designated as like a crop top or something like that, we tend to wear ours longer, closer to our hips, what our hip measurement would be, which is the widest section of your hips down across your butt. In vintage garments, they tend to be worn at the natural waist, so right around your belly button. Also, pants tend to be much higher waisted, so they would be at your natural waist or higher. So when you put all the clothing together, like having a shirt that ends at your natural waist isn't that odd. However, I don't have any high-waisted pants right now, so I have to lengthen all of my shirts. And the lengthening was pretty easy. There's not a lot of body shaping going on. Though I would say if you're going to lengthen it quite a bit, I would actually add some shaping in at the bottom to make it flare out a little bit over the hips, simply because you can get a weird gapping thing. I did not add any shaping in, and I kind of wish that I had. that's a Joe modification issue, not a pattern modification issue, because it was never supposed to be that long. So the way this pattern is constructed is actually really straightforward. You will have the body that comes up in the back. You'll make that first, and it's done in 3 pieces. So you make the back first, and that is basically shaped like a T. Little corners rounded out, so you have a straight part for the body. You have a section, short section of increases, which I thought that's where the problem was going to be in this pattern. Not at all. That part actually worked out really well. Anyway, so you have the increases, and then you chain, and then you put your arms on, work to a specific depth. It's listed in the pattern. Since I'm not really sure about copyright, I'll let you guys look it up. So you work to a specific depth, and then you do some very, very, very brief shoulder shaping, which is also, if you do the larger sizes, focus on the shoulder shaping and don't worry about the neck width. When you read it, you'll see what I mean. So you have a little tiny bit of shoulder shaping, and then you basically bind off, break your yarn. From there, you make the fronts. The fronts are made identically, and essentially they look like an upside down L. Now the fronts, each front is wider than half of the back, so that when you're done, you will have more fabric in the front of your garment. Again, this is not something unusual for vintage patterns. That's why I say if you have to calculate something, like you have to calculate what your gauge is supposed to be, you have to add up the front or fronts and the back and make sure you have them separately. You can't just take the back and multiply by 2, because odds are they're not going to be the same measurement. And this one here is the same thing. The fronts are wider. So anyway, you make the body of the front, you do your increases on one side only, put on your sleeve, work the sleeve just like you did before. When you get to the shoulder, this is where things get interesting. When you get up to the shoulder, the way the pattern instructions are written, you would think that you are going to have shaping for the neck, just like you did in the back. No, not the case. What you're supposed to do is work the shoulder and then skip neck shaping, so you don't round down. You instead create a small tab up at the top. That comes out to half the width of the back neck. You make your other side the same way. So you have 2 upside down L's with little tabs on top. You sew the edges of the tabs together, and then you sew it down to the back. Let me show you on how. You really can't see, but it makes this kind of invisible neck back. And it is how to build in a more invisible collar. Because unlike knitting with crochet, you can definitely see direction of stitches. So you just fold this one up in the back, and then you sew it down, and then you put your lace edging that goes all the way up and around. You put that on. It took me several tries to figure out how to do that, and the only reason that I kind of figured it out, quite frankly, was because I remembered a video. It was a sewing video, and I want to say it was by Yankee Couture, but I'm not sure, showing how to make a collar that looks built in, so it looks very seamless on a sewn garment. And I remembered back to that, and then it was like, oh, so that's what it's supposed to be. Now the other thing, we're gonna pop a pin in that thought for a moment. The other thing is that for this garment, not only is it supposed to be much shorter, like these side seams are supposed to be 9.5 inches long, which again would fall to a lot of people's natural waists. by the time you're done, or higher, which I would consider a crop top. As someone who is not svelte, I don't really wear crop tops, henceforth why I lengthened it. But what you're supposed to do in this pattern is to add in darts. And for those who don't sew and who don't know what a dart is when you have like a section of cloth and then you pinch it in to create body shaping. And it's a very, very common thing in sewing. If you watch any sewing vlog, you're going to come. I would be more surprised if you didn't come across darts if you watch any sewing vlog out there than if you did come across darts. They're very common in a sewing technique. And this blouse wanted you to add in 4-inch or 10 centimeter darts. That would remove 16 inches or 40 centimeters from the waistline. It's a lot. That's a lot. Now I also understand that when this originally came out, you had a lot of a different ideal body type, and you had a lot of support structure undergarments going on to kind of help smooth and create that ideal body type. I do not have that ideal body type, so I did not add in any darts. And yeah, so just be aware if you read this to go ahead and put in to consider the darts if you want. Now, what I was saying earlier about, sewing things, I have this concept. It always seems to me that a lot of the vintage patterns seem to be based on sewing patterns. Like, they took the pattern pieces for a sewing project and literally just made other pieces. They knitted or crocheted pieces to match that. And including the darts in this one kind of brings that theory back up, because if you wanted a waist that small, you could have just made it that small and basically built in the darts through increases like we see in other pieces. For some reason they wanted you to add them in later, which would make total sense if you were sewing, but we're not sewing. And I've noticed this from a couple others, where it just, like, I recognize the techniques from all of my looking into sewing. Like, I'm like, oh, that would make total sense if I were looking at a pattern piece, but from a knitting perspective, why didn't you just put them together? That would have made more sense. Anyway, it's just a thing that I've noticed. So when you are learning about vintage knitting stuff, it would not be a silly thing to also kind of familiarize yourself with some of the concepts when it comes to sewing, specifically vintage sewing as well. And I would recommend learning from all over the world. That's what I try to do. Henceforth, that's how I figured out the collar to this. Because you're going to learn about some different techniques that may not be popular in one spot, but may be applicable to what you're doing. So, and as far as the weight on this, I know in my original calculations it was supposed to be like 2,320 meters for this entire piece. Basically 12 of these. As you can tell by the fact that I am holding one of the skeins of yarn, I did not in fact use 12 of them, because I only had 12. I used 8. So this piece comes out to approximately 200 grams worth. And I'll put up what that approximate meterage came out to be, even with all of my modifications to it. So just kind of keep in mind that that is what I got, and that's why I said originally let those meterage things, I use them as a guide, not as something hard and fast. They're not rules. You need to be prepared to use this much, but you may not actually use that much. Anyway, I wanted to go ahead and show that one off. So yay, that's done. Also, you may notice I have the green Bryophyta out again. I have finished all the filming for the other one, so I am approximately like halfway done with the editing right now. So that is coming. The problem that I have, is that I tend to do multiple takes of everything. So when I'm doing editing, it's just a lot of sorting through what's there, figuring out the best take, editing stuff down, pulling out all of my ums, ahs, coughs, stuff like that, and making sure that you are getting something where you have all of the information and possibly it even looks good and isn't 3 hours long. I think I've got it down to like, I think I'm at like 45 minutes so far. That's that. It is coming, but I'm also very new at editing, so basically it's taking me a lot longer than any other professional. It would take any other professional. Because I'm not professional. I'm not even a film student. I'm just a person who watches YouTube trying to figure this out. But we're gonna figure it out. That's just it. If I can use sticks and string to tie a knot and make something wearable, I can figure out editing. Anyway. So the next thing I have figured out, is, I'm gonna pull this thing down. So you guys, I don't know if you remember for February, I had this top, which I believe is from pattern from the 1930s. I can link it down below. It is quite lovely. It's very comfortable and it's very easy to knit. It's, in my book, a very quick knit. It's also very short and incredibly lightweight. Like it's physically very light. It does not take up a lot of yarn. The problem with that is that, yet again, it is a crop top. And I don't really wear those. So it was fine when my partner and I, were living in some place that was much warmer where snow was never a possibility. So I said, okay, I need to figure out what to do with this. It is a crop top. I'm not going to wear that. So how do I go about making this into something that I will wear? And here I have an old project. This is one of my first like proof of concept projects. You know, it's green stripe with brown sleeves. It is it's a look. But I was proving to myself that I could in fact do the math and make a garment. And I don't wear this anymore. So I'm going to see about taking it apart and harvesting the yarn and seeing if I can take this yarn and fix up the green sweater. I also have a gold version of that same sweater. Same green one, I have a gold version as well. So I'm going to see about fixing those up. And I told myself if I can't figure this out, that those two just need to find another place to live. But with me getting rid of this, because I just don't wear it, I think I will be able to, or at least I'm going to try to make those wearable and something I can keep in my wardrobe. Because they are very comfortable. Like, that's the thing. Like, you put them on and you're just like, oh, I know why I have this. Okay, so I have that, and then I have two other projects to go ahead and show you that I have started. One of which is it's like a personal one, and you'll see why I say that. It is the start of the top-down lace blouse that I was talking about before. So this is also being done in silk merino, and it is top down. I did a couple of swatches for this because it requires a very, very fine gauge. Here is my original swatch. Okay. And this is done at 8 stitches to the inch in a lace pattern. I did try making this with an alpaca blend, and I just didn't really care for how this one turned out personally. It just was not what I was looking for. And then I tried the same silk merino doubled up. You can see it right here. It is not an unattractive pattern, but this version got very thick, which would make sense, and I didn't like the feel of it. So for the one I'm working on right now, let me go ahead and show you where I'm at, and then we'll talk about it some more. So, how you make this, if I can get this to my needles to not be silly. That's what it looks like. That's where I'm at. It's only on the front. How you work this is that you cast on for the collar, and then I worked mine to being 2 inches long. Then you will work a set number of stitches. Again, I'm not sure about the copyright on this, so I'm not going to put out too many specific numbers, but I will have a link to it down below, so you guys can get a copy of this, and then you can kind of see what I'm talking about if you're interested. So anyway, on the collar, you go ahead and work that. I work mine to 2 inches. Then you have a set number of stitches and then you continue working that rib out for a shoulder strap. The original pattern wanted you to knit around and then join a second, make your second shoulder strap, and they wanted you to join a second ball of yarn. Now I have worked with the silk merino before. I've just finished a project with it, and I have another one also in the silk merino that is knitted lace. And here's what I can tell you about it. It is delightfully soft. It is soft and smooth and surprisingly really warm. It is a very fine lace weight, which is something I like. And I enjoy this quite a bit. However, what this particular yarn does not like is being frogged. This silk merino has a very slight halo to it, and when you knit with it, it is going to tangle up, and it creates a very beautiful effect on a finished piece. However, trying to frog that is a lesson in frustration. So, and it will tangle very easily, in part because it wants to stick to itself, and then the other part of it is because it's so super fine that it's very easy for that to happen, and then basically you're trying to untangle sewing thread. If you can do that, you have much better eyes than I do. I have a lot of trouble with it, so I didn't feel like playing that game. So when I went to go make my second shoulder tab, I just broke my yarn and then added on the second shoulder strap, and then I'm only working with one ball at a time. Anyway, so you have created a collar, your 2 little shoulder straps, and then you will start from the front, and you're going to work your way down. You will increase for your armholes, your arm side, have the bust, and then it will come down. And this is meant for a 39-inch bust, and I think I calculated out, and it comes out to like a 45 finished width. At 8 stitches to the inch in pattern, it didn't tell me. So here's the funny thing with gauge. This pattern says you're supposed to have 8 stitches to the inch and 8 rows to the inch. As knitters, we know, well, that's an interesting measurement there. I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble with that. simply because of the difference between stitches and rows. So I after much swatching, because that wasn't quite all of them, those were just the ones that I was able to narrow it down to, because I had some that I was like, oh no, that's not working. So after much swatching, I went ahead and said, look, I've got the width down. I cannot get this row count down. So I'm probably going to have to go in and recalculate the row counts for everything. This is not the first time I've done this. I'm fairly certain, like I said, there was some kind of translation error. Somebody put something else down wrong. But my swatch came out to be 8 stitches wide in the lace pattern, and it's 12 rows deep. I'm doing something unusual and using the 2 different needle sizes. I normally don't do that. But anyway, that's my row gauge. And I think, as you can see, well, no, you can't see because I can't hold this up well, apparently. This is where I'm at. And this lace pattern is actually a very simple pattern. It's just 8 stitches wide. It's like a modified chevron or a horseshoe shape. And once you break it down, it's actually a very, very simple lace repeat. It just looks complicated from a distance because there are lots of the patterns done at a fine gauge and they're all right next to each other. So it looks super complicated. I'll let you in on how the rest of this is supposed to go. I've read through the patterns, and other than the sleeve cap, like the rest of it looks really, really, really straightforward. So I'll go ahead and let you know, again, this is supposed to take up 170 grams of yarn, of 2-ply lace weight. So I will go in and do the math and pop that one up. As to what it's supposed to take, I have a feeling it's going to take a little bit less than that, but I'm also know that I'm going to lengthen this some because, again, this is very short. I would like mine to be a little bit longer so that instead of hitting my natural waist, it falls down closer to like a high hip situation, which is about where jeans would fall, just as a thing. But I'll let you know because this is going pretty. I mean, this is like 2 days worth of work, which I know this doesn't really look like a lot for 2 days, but that's a lot of like, read the pattern, go back, read the pattern, go back, read the pattern, go back. Realize that that you're gonna have to do a lot of math and sigh and keep going because it's a really fun pattern. Anyway, I also have another tutorial one because I talked about that last week. I have another tutorial thing planned. So when I get the Bri Vita out, I'll already have another tutorial started. And I wanted to give you guys some background and context to kind of let you in a little bit on some of my design process. So this is very, very heavily inspired from one of the patterns from the Australia Women's Mirror. And I'll link the original down below. But here is the original. This is a pattern for a young man. It's also got a little bit of detailing on the sleeve. And this one's an unusual one for me because I actually had all of the colors they called for. So I was very excited. So this is actually a little bit closer to what it was originally supposed to look like. Considering that my only point of reference was a black and white photo for this, I was pretty excited. This pattern is very comfortable, and actually, if you can read the directions, it's very easy to put together. It fits well, and I like it a lot, and it's both why I'm making their copies. So I said, okay, I would like to take this and then gauge it out for multiple sizes. Again, mini vintage sizes will come in like 1, maybe up to 3 sizes, and that's it. I want to have a couple more than that. So I went ahead and started working the math, and while I was there, I decided to go ahead and change the color work pattern because there were certain things about this color work here that I liked in the original, and there's some stuff that I wanted to change. So I went ahead and did that. I changed a bunch of other stuff too, like the stitch count's different, the sleeves are done slightly differently. So from a construction standpoint, it is different. It's just heavily inspired. So anyway, here is my version. Okay. So that's the front. Here's the back, it's plain. And it is a very, very, very bold color work. And I love this sweater as well, because the shaping on it is so simple. It's very easy to toss on. It has bold color work, because if you're going to wear color work, I feel like you should just wear it, do it. And because I love these very specific sweaters so much, I was like, oh, well, my next tutorial one, I should make another one of these and then kind of take you guys along on the journey. And I decided to maybe not have one that is quite so bold, because this one is very bold. And I decided to really irritate 15-year-old me and do it in pinks and purples. 15-year-old me would be so angry at the concept of having another pink sweater. So let me go and show you these swatches. This is part of what I've been working on. So when I was talking about swatches and why you should do them, this is part of the reason. Here are 2 swatches, if I can get all my strings out of the way, that I've worked up. There's this one down here, and then there's a second one up here. And let me pull them. Okay. Now these are literally the same pattern as this, but this has a very different feel to it. And so when I went and I looked at everything, what you do, or what I do, whenever I have color work, is I actually work it up in Excel. And I will use that as kind of like my basis. And I will fill in the different little cells with different colors. And then I leave it up on the screen. I step back across the room. I look at it, see if I like that concept. I will knit a swatch, which is what happened here. And then I do the same thing. I pin it out, so this isn't blocked, it's just pinned down. And then I will set it up against a wall, and I will stand across the room and take a look at it, because color work from here will read very differently than here. Okay? And when I did that, I decided that this pink purple here, it blended too much. I did not like how this looked. The contrast seemed off. The same thing for these little my little bubble circles thing here. I did not like that. I did like this one. Like, I think that one looked okay. So I decided to do my zigzag with the same kind of color change that we have in the X and O diamond situation. And I came up with this up here. I just think that one looks a little bit better. The change of color and contrast, I think, works out easier, and I upped the contrast for the little bubbles. And so I believe that basically this are what I'm going to go with. Because they you know, the color changes there, but it's not as in your face. And I'm going to do a whole separate video, or possibly more than one, I don't know, on color work and figuring out what kind of colors you need or don't need. So that is coming. I'm not going to get into it here, but we'll get into it more at a different time. Anyway, I've decided to go ahead and do this. One, I need to use up all of these pinks because I have a bunch left over. And again, from Finish It February, like, one of the things that I told myself was that you're going to use up a bunch of this other yarn. Like, you don't leave one skein just hanging around. Use it. Figure out a way to use it. Because otherwise that may happen, and I don't want to have like the one spare skein. That's a personal thing. I don't like having that around. So I have these pinks, and I don't have enough for most of them of any like sweater quantity, but and the same thing for the tan, which is up here. It's not a sweater quantity, but if I combine it with a few other things, I can make a sweater quantity. And I wanted to go ahead and redo this color work one because it's a lot of fun. And that level of color work, like, it's engaging, but it's not too much work because you're only doing the fronts. Actually, makes the back harder because you're not. It's just plain stockinette. But that's a really simple TV project. You just sit down and like watch some TV or some YouTube, throw on a podcast, and just go. It's that kind of thing. So that's what I've got on the needles and in the plans for right now. I'll be sure to throw in some footage of me modeling some of this stuff, and you should have links down below to all of these projects, and I'll keep you up to date on what's going on with this. It's a lacy, Matron's lacy blouse from 1935. I'll let you know how that one's going. So far it's working up well, and then I'll have the tutorial out. The Bride Fighter one's taking me a little while, but halfway there, so I'm hoping to have it out by the end of March. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, and I will see you guys next week. Have fun and make stuff. Oh, the sun's coming up.